Hi, and thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Jacqueline.
And I'm your host, Nicole. You're listening to the first season of Perfictionist.
In this episode, we will be discussing the second half of part 1 of Kingdom of Ash. More specifically, we'll be discussing chapters 32 through chapter 67. This is part 2 of a 4-part series.
In this episode, we're going to discuss a lot of spoilers. We're going to touch on major plot points that happen throughout this section of the book. We're not going to get to every detail because there are so many wonderful details in this book. Like, it's incredible the amount of just thought and effort that went into this book. So please make sure you're reading it at some point because you don't want to miss all the things that we don't discuss. And if your favorite part doesn't get discussed, please leave it in the comments down below because we would love to hear what jumped out and what you really loved about this section of the book.
Absolutely. There's so many moving parts in this story. It's impossible to cover all of it. And we tried to in our last episode, and we ended up recording over 2 hours of footage. So
too many hours.
too many hours.
2 is too many.
So we're going to start with the second half of part 1. Part 1 is called Armies and Allies. And we're going to go through the different perspectives, and we'll just let you know which one we're talking about as we go through and speak about them. So we're going to start with Dorian, Manon, and the 13, plus the Kraken Covens. So if you'll remember, the 13 and Manon and Dorian had headed to Elway, and they're there. But they discovered that the Elway warband was destroyed.
So sad.
Yeah, and Manon is feeling that this is her fault because she kind of delayed the movement toward Elway with her sort of plot to kind of get to show that like they could trust them, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, it really backfired on her.
Because she feels so guilty, she decides, because Dorian offers to burn the witches, but she's like, no, I want to bury them by hand. And so she takes out her iron claws and starts digging literally by hand. And the 13 start to dig too, and she makes it very clear she only wants the 13 and herself to be doing this task. And so they end up bloody and everything, just digging, but it does end up earning the respect of the Kraken witches.
Yeah, it was really moving to see, like, because it showed the Kraken witches just that the Iron Teeth witches do feel like they mourned the loss of these individuals who they'd never met before, and they felt like the heaviness of what had happened, and it kind of signified to the Kraken witches, like, okay, they're not just these brutal witches who don't actually care.
Yeah, because we actually, because we do see Manon's point of view and learn more about Astrid and the 13, we know that they're not just brutal, unfeeling war machines. But as far as the rest of the world is concerned, that's still what they think. They don't realize that these guys have been going through like some internal realizations.
Yeah, so it's nice for them to kind of show that they are growing as a group. And we also get Dorian, and he previously had kind of spoken to Gavin. And so we wanted to call Gavin again to get more information. But lo and behold, someone different shows up, and it's Keltane. I was so excited about this part because I like always felt like we didn't get enough of Keltane. Like in the beginning, she was so annoying, and I would have been happy never to hear from her again.
Yeah.
But then everything that happens at Morath with her saving a light and like bringing down a whole section of Morath, like you just like fall in love with her just as she like is done in the story. So for her to be brought back and have this kind of heart to heart with Dorian and speak to him about like his eventual travels down to Moria. It's really, really cool just to get a little bit more of her.
Yeah, absolutely. I also felt that we didn't learn enough about her, considering the huge part she ended up playing.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I would love like a novella
Yeah, I was just
of
thinking that.
her.
I'm like, I'm pretty sure we are like petitioning a novella in our minds
Yeah,
of
yeah,
Paltine's like stories when she was at Mora.
yeah.
So wish it into existence, everybody.
Manon and Dorian decide to go to the Farian Gap to ask the witches to join them. And something that we have kind of learned about Dorian and his raw magic, if we discussed in our past episode, was that he could shapeshift or potentially shapeshift. So he's really struggling with this magic. But because Dorian wants to go to Morath to fetch the third word key, his plan is to use his shapeshifting abilities to do that. But
Mm-hmm.
Manon is like, you're not ready. So
Mm-hmm.
going to the Farian Gap, they basically create like this test. Like, can he even hold on to whatever form or whatever that he chooses, whether it just be changing eye color or hair color or anything. And it's interesting once they get there because I wasn't expecting Manon to sort of give the speech that she did, um,
Mm-hmm.
essentially pleading with the Iron Teeth witches to be better than they were made to be. Because when she was executing that Kraken witch, the Kraken witch had said something to her that really settled deeply within her, and I think it sort of almost started this whole event of Manon discovering that she's human, so to speak, like in terms
Yeah.
of she's not just an unfeeling, killing, brutal witch. She, they're not, they don't have to be like that. That's not how they were necessarily born, but what they
Mm-hmm.
were molded into and what the matrons basically indoctrinated them into. And so she gives this like speech about all of this type of thing, like you were made and everything. You don't have to be like that. There's a choice to the Iron Teeth. And yeah, I was just surprised by that.
Yeah, it was a really good speech. And then when Astrid steps up and exposes her stomach and is
Mm-hmm.
like, who else has experienced this? Knowing she's not the only one who's gone through this experience and just
Mm-hmm.
like completely came out with her truth to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't. Like,
Oh.
it was one of the, I mean, I honestly can't go more than 3 chapters in this book without bawling my eyes out. I'm so attached to all these characters at this point
Yeah.
that I just feel what they're going through so deeply. And
Mm-hmm.
that in that moment, I was just like, oh, gut wrenching.
Oh, it was. Yeah. Yeah, because if you recall, Astrid, like she has a scar like carved into her that says unclean. So, oh, brutal. Yeah, Astrid. She's one of my, like, she's a very much a side character because we don't hear too much from her. But when we do, it is so intense, and she's one of my favorite characters of the story. One of my favorite side characters, I guess.
Yeah. Her storyline's very powerful, even though it's quite small in the grand scheme of things.
Mm-hmm.
A little while later, they kind of go back to the original camp where they had met the Kraken witches. And like they, after she said her speech and everything, and Petra let them all leave without any consequences and stuff like that, which is, I guess, another sort of a big deal that she was able to go in, do her speech, and then leave. So everyone
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, okay, that's a little outside the norm as is. But then,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, the 3 matrons actually somehow track them back. And they don't bring anybody, which I was a little surprised by this, but I guess they were cocky enough to think that they could kind of handle the situation on their own. So it's not really explained how they found out about everything or like where their location was, but the 3 matrons come down and Manon draws like a literal line between the matrons and the Kraken witches in her coven
Yeah.
and tells no one else to pass it, kind of thing. Like she's going to fight the matrons all by herself. And
Yeah.
she even asked Dorian, like, don't step in with your magic. This is my fight.
Yeah.
And she ends up beheading the Yellow Legs witch, and which is like cool in itself, just because the yellow witches are always like, they're kind of like the worst of the iron teeth. They're kind
Mm-hmm.
of like, I don't know, the sleaziest, I guess you could say.
Yes.
So just to take her down is a feat. But the real victory with that takedown was the Yellow Legs witch had Rhiannon, Queen Rhiannon's crown that Baba Yellowlegs had stole.
That's right.
So when
Yes.
she was beheaded, the crown tumbles down and Manon picks it up and actually like puts it on. And that was
Mhm.
like a pretty cool moment.
It was cool. I loved also the description of the crown. Like it wasn't physically heavy. I believe it was described that it felt like it was made of moonlight.
Mm-hmm.
I thought
And it
that
was
was
like
really
almost like
cool.
actual real stars. Like it was
Yeah.
created out of real stars,
So
and it
cool.
glowed and stuff. It sounds so beautiful.
It does.
And she ends up letting the blue blood matron go. She's like, Petra let me go after my speech without any cause. We're even now. I'm letting you go. Tell Petra she has a choice to make.
Yeah.
And then, so it's just her and her grandma left. And they have like this ongoing thing from way back in like the beginning of Empire Storms,
Oh yeah.
this unfinished battle that they had started. And in the end, she was going to let Astrid do like the final fight.
Hmm.
But then her grandma runs away, which is
Yeah.
like not heard of for witches to run
No.
away from a battle. That is like the ultimate, like,
Shameful thing.
yeah.
Yeah. Like in a way, how can she even remain matron after running away from a battle? In a way,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And I like how Dorian and her have a conversation later that explains that that was kind of the best course of action. Because if she
Hmm.
killed them all, they kind of become martyrs. But the fact
Exactly.
that she killed one, let one go, so showed mercy, and then one ran, it's like, you can't get better than that.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually like, oh no, when they didn't kill her. But then I thought, gee, I'm sure glad it's Manon in this position and not me. I probably would have just gone ahead and killed her and then there'd be a real mess.
Yeah. Her restraint was, yeah,
Yeah.
kind of showed her growth as well.
Yeah, totally. That was so intense. Like I wasn't expecting the three matrons to come and confront them like that.
Mm-hmm. That was a brilliant chapter.
It was. So moving on, Dorian and Manon. They have a thing.
Yes.
They have a thing, as we all know. But when she finds out that he's going to go into Morath by himself, she's upset, to say the
She's
least.
very upset.
Very, very upset. Yeah. And obviously she doesn't want this to happen because she cares about him. Of course, I don't know that she'll like admit that, but it's obvious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so she ends up like coming up with this idea that like if you and I get married, you know, then we have like Aderlin, the witches united, you know, like alliance. Maybe you don't need to do this, like, but Dorian knows her well enough that, well, and sorry, let me rewind just a quick second. So they spend a very passionate night together.
Mm-hmm.
And the following morning, when Manon wakes up, Dorian's gone. And it almost endears him to her more because it was like he knew her so well that he was like, because the witches are very like stand on your own 2 feet kind of thing. They're
Mm-hmm.
not going to rely on a man to come and save them ever. Like that is like the opposite of what the witches are like.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that she offered him this alliance, I think really spoke volumes about how much she cared for him and she was trying to provide a solution for him, even if it meant getting married for herself.
Yeah.
And he was like, I can't do that to her. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I think at one point she describes it as a sacrifice. She's like, everyone else is making sacrifices in this war. Why should I not have to as well? And he knows that she cares deeply for him. Like, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's been established between them, regardless of how much they refuse to like verbalize it. And he's like, I care too much about her to cage her.
Mm-hmm.
And he was literally envisioning her behind bars almost.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I can't do that to her. She's a free individual. And he knows she would resent him in the end for it.
Mm-hmm.
And he can't do it.
So
And
much
it's just
respect for
he loves her so
Dorian.
much that he can't cage her.
Can we just talk about his character development for a second? Like, think about when we first met him and where he is now. Like,
Mm-hmm.
wow. He's
Yeah,
come
he
a
was
long way.
such a swaggering but subtle kind of
Playboy.
presence.
Yeah, kind of a playboy-ish, playboy-esque
But without the
presence.
arrogance. He was
Without the arrogance,
playboy,
just
but
like
without the yeah.
flirtatious and charming, like
Mm-hmm.
very likable. And now
He
he's
was
this other
he was
entity
just
entirely.
mm-hmm. Oh, he's shifted so much, and he's become a lot more harsh, but
Mm-hmm.
not in a bad way.
It needed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
With the
Yeah.
environment that they're in now, like war, and you think about who he was when we first met him and where he is now, how would that sort of happy, charming boy survive a war like this? So it's sort of like everything he's gone through has hardened him to prepare him for this.
Mm-hmm. And he's kind of grown up in the sense before he was very much like a boy. He was a prince. And
Mm-hmm.
now it's no, you need to grow up. You need to make the tough choices. You need to be the king, the man kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And he's done that shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pretty incredible character building.
Well, and done in such a way that you still you liked him then and you still like him now. So it's he's
Yeah.
gone through this shift but yet your feelings for him haven't really changed.
Yeah.
If anything, you have grown to respect him even more.
Absolutely. That's exactly how I feel about Dorian.
Speaking of Dorian, as we said, he does end up going on this quest to find the third key. So he takes off at the very end. And throughout sort of the story up to this point, he's been working on a shifting. Specifically, he's been learning how to fly. So he's been transforming into a bird, and a kind of nondescript bird that's going to fly under the radar. And he has flown off to Morath. And that's sort of where we leave Dorian in the storyline, is he's gone off, and we'll have to
Good
wait to see what
luck.
happens. I'm so nervous for him. I feel
Me
like
too.
that's going to be I don't know. That's going to be a very intense chapter when we get there.
I think, yeah, the tension shall be high.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, Minon's wearing that crown. She actually took it over to Glennis and offered it to Glennis. And Glennis was like, no, it's yours.
Mm-hmm.
So Minon is now the queen. And queen of the witches kind of thing. And
Yeah.
so she ends up asking the Krakens to go to war. And it was I'm actually getting goosebumps thinking about it. It's a really cool scene because they have this eternal flame, this sacred flame they always keep burning.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess in movies when they're doing help signals to the towers, and they light the towers on fire, and then on the mountain over they light it, and so on and so forth. It's that idea essentially, but from hearth to hearth, and each hearth can be the queen calls, what is it? It's the queen calls you to war or whatever, and then they're like, yes, we will answer the call or whatever.
Yeah.
And something like that.
Mm-hmm. It's a very specific ritual that they do.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it goes from hearth to hearth in their camp, and everybody, yes, will answer the call. And then another witch takes this eternal flame, lights a torch type thing on fire, and takes off on her wyvern to go and continue to spread the news that the queen has called everybody to go to war. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just so cool. It was such a cool scene. Oh my goodness.
Because you realize how many Kraken witches there are, because they've just been living among people. It talks about how they're dusting, grabbing their dusty broomsticks from under their bed, from their closets, kissing their babies, and you're like, oh, there's little witch babies out there,
yeah,
and just leaving their husbands and flying off,
taking off. It's
living
it
that
would make
human
an
life.
amazing scene in a show or a movie.
So good.
And there was a lot of people who didn't even realize witches were living amongst them, and then until they're
Hmm.
taking off on their brooms to go answer the call to war.
Yeah, and all these witches have the brooms, like all the Kraken witches ride brooms, not
Yeah.
the Wyverns,
Yeah.
and so they're like, you're getting that very stereotypical. Like if you were to see it in a movie form, it'd be like that very stereotypical
Witch.
witches on broomsticks flying through the air. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I loved picturing that part.
I thought it was so cool. And I wasn't expecting to get that point of view of all these Krakens living in amongst humans and
Hmm.
taking off. And I didn't realize. I for some reason thought, I guess, yeah, because they were in hiding because they were always being hunted, right? So that makes
Hmm.
sense. But yeah,
You kind of
so
always pictured them like the ones that Manon found, like in hiding, as in like in their covens, just kind of going from place to place to their secret little
yes.
hideaways,
Yeah,
not realizing so much more to it.
exactly. Yeah.
Next up, we're going to jump into Adian, Lysandra, and the Ally army's perspective. So when we left off, they were in the middle of a battle against Morath, and it's not going so well. So they kind of had gone down to the borderline of Terrasen against Daro's wishes, and took the battle kind of to the front lines. And it's not going good. It's going
Mhm.
terribly, in fact.
Mhm.
Like every time I got onto this storyline, my anxiety was through the roof. I like this storyline was very hard for me to read in this section because I was
Mhm.
just so nervous about how this was going to go because it was just so terrible. It was absolutely horrible what was happening to them.
Every time it came up, the scene, it was just awful, sort of hopelessness.
Mm-hmm. It seemed so absolutely hopeless. Like they can't possibly get out of this.
Hmm.
And after like one day of like really harsh battle, they're in their war tents because kind of at night the battle stops because it's too dark to continue fighting. And Lysandra's been doing her thing, like she's just in beast mode every day on the battlefield. And then at night she comes in to Adian's tent, and she's like every time she shifts back into her normal form, she's like naked. So she's
Hmm.
often naked and just like so unabashedly Barinol, and she's in Adian's tent, and he kind of sends everyone else away. Although, side note, there's no way people did not hear this conversation through the tent wall.
Right?
Like, it's a tent.
Yeah.
And they're like going off about how she's not actually Aelin. I'm like, this is a private conversation. They are
I know. It's
just on
like,
the other side of canvas.
shh. Oh my gosh, you guys, keep your voice down.
I know. But he's like ripping into her about the fact that this is all her fault. Like he's literally blaming the fact that they're doing poorly on Lysandra and kind of in turn Aelin for this
Mhm.
horrible plan that they crafted of her like pretending to be Aelin because she doesn't have her power. She doesn't even have her strength in fighting. Like she just isn't Aelin.
Mhm.
And like the things he says to her is so incredibly brutal. Like I thought I was mad at Rowan when he went off on Selena back in Air of Fire. This
Mhm.
was so much worse. My blood was boiling. And then
Yes.
he literally throws her naked into the snow.
Yeah. She was very dignified about it, considering her situation. But
Mhm.
it was essentially like all of this anger and resentment that had been building up since he had found out about this plan that they had concocted, just coming to a head and then just like exploding at Lysandra about it.
Yeah.
Oh man.
No. I like we talked about last time how we can understand why he's angry and why he resents the plan and sort of like given his backstory. But at the same time, like I feel like so many people have so much hate for Kale. Where's the hate for Adian? Because right now I am so not okay with this guy.
I
Like
know. I feel like this is so much worse than anything Kale ever did. Like,
I know, I think he's getting off a little easy with the fandom.
I
Just saying.
agree.
Just
I
saying.
agree. Yeah. I never hear anything about Adian in the fandom. I'm not sure why.
Maybe maybe that speaks louder
Yeah.
than hatred towards him.
Perhaps. Yes. So after this whole horrible, I want to say one-sided verbal flogging,
Yes.
the battle just continues to get worse and worse. Everything is just bad, and the men are really, the morale is at an all-time low, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Because if Aelin were actually there and she was using her power, can you imagine having that on your side? Like, you'd be like, yeah, we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
really mess you up or whatever.
Well, you'd
But
hardly have to
she's
lift a
not.
finger because she would just
She just,
decimate them.
and I always think, like, how could they not lose faith? And this is exactly what was happening. How could they not lose
Mm-hmm.
faith if her power wasn't being used? And this is exactly what's happening. They're completely losing faith, and they're losing their men's sort of courage to fight and everything. Because I mean, it's obvious why. They're just all dying. So in order to rally the troops, Lysandra does something very, very dangerous, because she's not a skilled or trained like swordsman type thing. So in the middle of battle, she transforms into like human Aelin, so that people, and it works, because it's like, the queen has come, and then people are like, oh
Mm-hmm.
yes, fight with the queen, like she's on the front lines battling it out. And Aedion sees this happen, and he's like, and that's when he realizes,
Yeah. Well, he
oh
messed up.
no. And that was a big eye roll from me, because it's like, are
Mm-hmm.
you serious? You had to wait for her to be in mortal peril in order to realize, like, oh, come on, man. Like, yeah, anyway.
Yeah. Too little, too late.
So she obviously gets like seriously injured. I'm so sorry. My cat is very verbal today, very vocal. Anyway, if you hear a meow, that's just what's going on. Yeah. So Lysandra, though, she is, she's the best
The absolute best.
every
Like,
time. Every time, like, she sees something dire, she's like, I got it. I'll fix it. And then she goes ahead and risks her life. Like, she's been she has been so close in so many instances where she could die, um, by a choice she's made in order to save the people around her.
mm-hmm.
She's an amazing, amazing character.
Yeah. I don't think that it can be said enough that she has got to be like the MVP of the series.
Yeah.
Like, it, you could say it a million times and it would not be giving her enough credit.
Yeah. I know.
She's
I
gonna
just,
win this war single pod, single feathered, single handed. Like,
I
she can
almost
do it
feel
all.
like inspired to create some art of her. Just
Mm-hmm.
like of Lysandra and her awesomeness. Like, it just, she's amazing.
I mean, obviously, she can't do what Aelin can do, which is why, despite doing, her very best, she's not going to beat that. I think she's fighting like an Ilkin or something in a
Hmm.
human form. And so she's not going to win against that. But
No.
as a person in general, like, she holds her own usually, because usually she can
Hmm.
shift into something and then she would take it out like nothing.
Hmm.
But
And she's
yeah.
got this amazing heart.
Mm-hmm.
I was so, like, you're talking about how enraged you were with Aedion. Like, she's like literally like naked, exhausted from just battling it out. She's not a trained warrior. I want to keep saying that she's not a trained warrior. And she's
Mm-hmm.
on the front lines just battling it out, probably in snow leopard form, I would think. And then he's giving her this verbal lashing, and I'm just like, come on, man. Like, jeez. She's doing everything she can. And I mean,
Yeah. And
it's not her fault that Aelin, like, it's going to be Aelin's scheming that came up with, like,
yeah,
with
she's
this
just
whole
going along
plan.
with it.
Yeah, like, Aelin's her queen, and she's doing what her queen has.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
feel like she's verbalized that. Like,
Hmm.
she's like, I'm doing my duty here. Like,
Get on
but
board.
yeah, get on board. But of course, things get worse because the storyline is horrific. And in come the witch towers that have
Mm,
been kind of mentioned since like way back in like Queen of
way back.
Shadows.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you remember, they're the only power witches have, like the only magic witches have, other than like to fly on brooms, which is pretty magical, is called the yielding. But in the
Yes.
yielding, they like essentially become human explosive.
It's like a
And
kamikaze situation.
and so they use the witch towers and a witch who is going to perform the yielding to create a mass destruction event. Aedion is like running towards Lysandra, who's like battling this Ilkin in Aelin's form, and he kind of like tries to barricade her, like pull her away from what is happening with with the witch tower, and it just like kind of takes out a huge area. And Lysandra is like on the verge of death at this point. Like, well, really, you don't know because it kind of like is like explosion, and then it like cuts to a different perspective, and you're like, oh, what? But
Yeah. Oh,
going back into that perspective, we do see she does end up surviving.
you know, these these chapters, almost every single chapter ends on a cliffhanger. And you're going
Yes.
like, "What?" And then it shifts perspective and you're going, "No, I have to read about this other perspective." It's just like every
Sometimes
single
it's a
chapter is
little
like,
jarring.
"Oh my goodness."
Like, remember the feeling we were talking about when you're doing the tandem read of like having to put down
Yeah,
Empire of Storms and then like go into like a kind of a slower paced Tower of Dawn. This book almost does that within itself
within
because like
itself.
something epic will happen in one storyline, but then you shift to a storyline that's kind of not in the middle of something crazy going on, and so it's like your body kind of comes down, which maybe that's like helps you to kind of calm down a little bit, but at the same time you're like in the midst of like something like a battle, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden you're like now talking about something completely different.
Yeah, it's jarring.
Mm-hmm. Lysandra wakes up in one of the war tents, and Aedion is with her, and he's acting all like loving and caring, and is like, "Oh, so glad she's awake." And I, as much as I want them to get back together, I have to give her credit for this scene because she's like,
Yes.
"No, sir, the way you treated me was not acceptable, and I will not be forgetting that." And she like had this description of like, I have been made to beg. I have been made to literally crawl on the ground because from what she used to do as a courtesan before.
Yeah.
And she's like, I have never felt so embarrassed in my life or
Yeah.
like so degraded in
Degraded.
my
Yeah.
life than that moment you threw me out in the snow naked.
Yeah.
And she stood her ground. And I was like, thank you for not being that girl who's like, oh, the guy I like has finally come around, even though he treated me horribly.
Yeah.
And I feel like they'll get there, but no, he needs to pay for what he said. He needs to
Yeah.
stew in that.
Absolutely. I was on one hand surprised because they're in the middle of a war and they could die, either of them could die at any moment. But on the other hand, it's like if they don't, she needs to like establish that like there are boundaries and you have so crossed this line
Mm-hmm.
that I mean, he was terrible to her. And at I just said like I was surprised because they're in the middle of war. Well, yeah, they're in the middle of war. So why would he say those awful things to her? Because either of them could die at any moment. So it sort of goes both ways with all of
Mm-hmm.
that. So I was very proud of Lysandra. I was like, good for you, girl. Like seriously, like she's right. She's been through it and she knows men. And what makes it worse is that she cares for Aedion. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I like this part too, because she even explains to him, she's like, I agreed to Aylin's plan because I already wanted to have kids with you. I
mm-hmm.
already
Oh,
wanted to end up with you. So it
aw.
wasn't a big deal for me to agree to the plan because it was just this plan I wanted in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And like when he heard that, I think it like really struck him like, okay, this wasn't anything malicious. Like now that you kind of hear that, you're like, oh, yeah.
Oh, I guess I didn't
Yeah.
look at it from that perspective.
Yeah.
Oh, it actually doesn't sound that bad anymore. But now she's like giving him the two middle fingers kind of thing.
Yeah. And asking him to get out of her tent.
Yeah. As
Like,
she
oh,
should. How
as
dareth
he
he?
should.
Yeah, I like that she also said like it took for me almost dying. Like it I almost had to die for you to realize. Like that is insane kind of thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
she's right. It
So right.
shouldn't take that level of like that extreme level to get his attention like and
Mm-hmm.
make him realize what's what, and it did, and she calls him out on it, and I love her for it. There's so
Me
many
too.
reasons I love Lysandra.
I feel like this is very much in character. I'm
Yes.
not surprised by this at
No, I'm
all.
not surprised by it either, but it's just I just love her. I think she's fantastic. She's
So,
so strong, and yeah, I just love her. So Lysandra had shifted back to her own body in front of everybody. So then everybody knew she wasn't Aelin. So the heist is kind of like up, like they've been
mm-hmm.
caught. Um, Darrow, I guess, came from his little abandoned snow camp that he was left and crawled back. And he catches up to them and he's like, how dare you? And he strips him of his title, takes a sort of Orinth, like makes it so he's no longer the leader of the Bane. Which I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, does Darrow understand how these things work? Like, you can't just be like, listen, you're the new commander or captain, because the men, like, they feel a loyalty to Aedion. And
Mm-hmm.
you can't just like randomly name somebody else and expect the men to also feel that sense of like loyalty and service towards this other person.
Yeah. Like he still was the general because everyone kept asking him what to do anyways. But
Yeah.
in title, he was like
Yeah.
now like the lowest of the ranks in the army.
And he's also at a point now where he just doesn't give two flying F's anymore. He just,
Mm-hmm.
he's like, I don't care. Fine, take my title.
Yeah. I think he literally says that. I think he's just like, I am done. I don't care
I
anymore.
don't
Like
care about
they're
anything.
losing. Lysandra hates him.
Yeah.
He's no longer has his title. He's like, what's left? Like,
He just doesn't care anymore. He's at a very low point in life.
it is decided that they are going to go back to Ornth and kind of do Doro's plan of like just setting up a siege and like staying safe behind the walls. And they're kind of on their way back there. And there's two ways they can go, but because there's this massive frozen river in their way, or like so cold, it's not frozen over, so they can't cross it, but it's like ice cold water.
Mhm.
And they're kind of being like herded in a sense. So Morath's armies are actually pretty clever and they're
Mhm.
herding them in a specific direction so that they can like battle them
Corner
again
them.
before they get to Ornth. Yeah,
Yeah.
like corner them. And so they're like in a really, really dire situation. Adian understands like we might not make out alive after this point. Like this could be the end for us. So he
Mhm.
asks Ren to send aid and like call for aid. So like send out our messengers, call for aid.
Mhm.
And this aid, this message is actually the one that Manon receives when she asks all the witches to go to war.
Mhm.
So she gets the message from one of the Kraken witches, comes in and is like, Terracin calls for aid. And everyone turns to Manon and they're like, what are you going to do? And she's like, I'm going to answer. And then, like, that starts that whole line that we talked about. And
Yes.
it was just so incredibly
I
touching.
know. I just got like the goosebumps as you were
Mm-hmm.
describing that.
Yeah.
And then another like group of people that we kind of haven't talked about in a while, the
Mm-hmm.
Mycenaeans.
Yay.
They show up on the river. So it's awesome because I'd forgotten about the Mycenaeans,
Well,
to be
yeah, they kind
honest.
of were like, we don't even know if they're going to show up anymore. Like, they said they were
Yeah,
going to, but like, who knows with
who
them?
knows? Like they have a really good tendency of like disappearing off the face of the planet.
Yeah.
But yeah, but they did show up,
They
and like
did.
in oh man, it was very much like we're screwed. We're gonna all die, and yeah, they totally would have. But the Mycenaeans showed up and saved
Yeah.
them.
And they showed up with the fire lancers, so it's like all of a sudden
Mm.
fire. And you're
Yeah,
like, Aelin?
Aelin.
But no, it was the Fire Lancers, which is still really cool because the Fire Lancers were like from the southern continent and like Kale had like
Yeah,
ordered more of them, which
yeah,
maybe will come into play with this. But
yeah.
yeah, they It
But it
was a
was
pretty cool
it's
scene.
also like a very, very large sign of like, I feel hope because their queen is the fire bringer. So then when you're
Mm-hmm.
seeing all this fire, which we all know the Valg hate fire,
Yeah.
it's like, oh yeah, it was just, thank goodness. So moving on to Aelin, Rowan, Alide, and the cadre's perspective, uh, we're going to just talk about them now. Because we're all wondering, what's Aelin up to, guys? Yeah, so let's recap a little bit. So Aelin was rescued from the torture of Maeve and Cairn and everything, and the little folk, all this different stuff. Little folk are kind of like guiding them, and we're learning more and more about the little folk. So the little folk give them a ship because they need a way of like traveling quickly and in a way that they can like avoid bad things in order to kind of get to where they need to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they're actually sailing through underground rivers. So they're going underneath all of like the bad stuff, which is very handy.
Mm-hmm.
So because so during this little, they're like on these super dark boats. We actually get like a lot of Alide's perspective. And then because Aelin, you'll remember she's descended from Mab.
Mm-hmm.
So because Maeve is a Valg, she's technically not the true ruler of Dornell, right? Because she's not Fae. I mean, she's tricked everyone into believing it, right? But now that we
Yeah, she
know that
stole
she's
the crown.
Valg, she stole the crown. So it's it always passes down through the female part of the line. And so the true heir is actually Aelin because she's descended from Mab, because they're kind of discussing like what's going to happen with Doranel, like once Maeve is taken care of, kind of thing. And this is something Aelin hadn't even considered because there's obviously a lot of other things to think about. But
Mm-hmm.
she's the true heir. So she's not only the heir to Terrasin, but also the heir to Doranel. And it's actually a little bit later that they mention, a few chapters later that they mention this, but essentially like they're realizing like the little folk are giving them so much aid because Aelin is technically their true queen. So, so they end up calling Aelin like the fairy queen of the West. And she's like, I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
be the fairy queen of the West. Like, I don't want to rule Doranel. Someone else can do it. So she's trying to figure out like who can do it. And then they're discussing like different lineages and stuff to discuss like who would be the good. And I think they ended up settling on Celine. If I'm not sure if I'm saying that right.
I think it's one of Rowan's
It's
cousins.
one of Rowan's cousins, but it's like the name Celine, but there's two L's, so I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's what they kind of ended up settling on. It wasn't like a for sure thing, but that's what was discussed. But yeah, I just felt like such a, oh right, yeah, like I didn't even think of that as well. Like she would be the queen of Doranel and of the Fae.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that yeah, but she's like wants nothing to do with it, which is fair. I
No.
mean, like no one needs two
Yeah.
kingdoms. Let's not be greedy here.
Yeah, but like I just thought that was, yeah, it was just something I hadn't even considered. There's so much other stuff going on.
Mm-hmm. It is cute though that the little folk give her the crown, like because
Yes.
Maeve had made her wear the crown while she was like kind of being tortured, as like almost like a mocking thing. And then it got chucked into the river, and the little folk found it and gave it to her, like not in a mocking way, but in like an honest way. Like this actually is your crown. You should have it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think she has the crown somewhere. She doesn't wear it, but I think she like tucks it away somewhere.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to know more about the little folk. How do they know stuff? Because we learned earlier that Brannon was like communicating with them,
Mm-hmm.
but how do they
Yeah.
like? They seem to know everything.
I know. I want to know more about them too. I hope we get to know more through as the story progresses. Maybe as they
Mm-hmm.
get back into Terrasin, where they and through the forest and stuff, because they seem to live in the forest around
Yeah.
Terrasin.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's more that's going to happen regarding the stags and the little folk to come.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing that they end up doing on their journey is they end up stopping kind of where the barrow
Mm-hmm.
somethings, I can't remember what they're
Yeah, the
called. Barrows.
barrow. barrow like mounds or field, the barrow
Yeah.
fields. That was sort of where same idea as where when Rowan had Selena and she ended up fighting like the barrow wights.
Yeah, that's what they're called, barrow whites. And they stop and like pillage some graves, essentially, tombs. And among their pillaging, Aelin finds two rings, one for her and one for Rowan, to kind of like solidify their marriage. And I just thought that was a really cute detail. And I know we're not talking about all the little details, but that was one that really stood out to me. It's just like a sweet moment.
Well, yeah, I think it's actually very important as well because we haven't mentioned it, but Aylin's been very distant from Rowan since she has been
Mm-hmm.
recovered from her torture. And this was sort of a way like she was kind of reaching out to him to be like, yes, like we are together, we are mates. But this is also like she lived as a human for many years. And this is the human tradition is they exchange rings. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it was really important because it was a step in the right direction with her healing to like show Rowan that like I'm still in here, you know.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And one question that came up for me while I was reading sort of this section, and because Aelin and Roan have a massive discussion about their mate bond and coming to terms with the fact that they were always mates but were tricked by Maeve.
Hmm.
And I am not 100% sure why she did that. Like, I don't know what her ultimate goal was in keeping Rowan and Aelin apart. And I don't know if it's something we are already supposed to know or if it's something that's going to be revealed later.
Well, I think having Aelin bonded to Rowan, they're two very powerful individuals. You know, keeping those powerful individuals apart would be ultimately better for Maeve if she wants to remain in control. Maybe she thought with the two of them together, she could be overthrown. That's kind of what I'm thinking because I think Rowan can enhance Aelin's power as we've seen in the past, and
Mm-hmm.
Aelin has the ability, I think, you know, to kill the Valk with her
Yeah.
fire. So I would assume that's why. And by also I think it's all just about control for Maeve
Mm-hmm.
because with his Lydia, his past uh, fake mate or whatever, and then her having died and everything, and then him like constantly mourning the loss of who he thought was his mate, I think allowed Maeve to keep like
Mm.
firmer control on him. Because I think the mate
Yeah.
bond is pretty powerful. So,
Now, I know that she faked his past relationships so that he would give her the blood oath
yeah.
to keep them apart. I was
Yeah.
just wondering if, like, yeah, it's like, is there more to why she wanted them to stay apart? But what
Hmm.
you said definitely makes sense.
It
That
could
they
be
are
that,
much more
but
powerful together.
they are. But I don't know. Maybe we will learn more about that. Maybe it's not as simple as what I think. So Lorcan and Alide have not been on good terms. Alide basically hates him. um, but Lorcan loves Alide, and this is something that I think is pretty obvious, has
Mm-hmm.
been obvious for a while. So Aelin offers Lorcan the blood oath, basically saying, you can either offer me the blood oath, and it's not because of the love thing, it's because his loyalties are a little bit too unclear for Aelin to be able to
Mm-hmm.
trust him. So she offers him the blood oath, or he can never set foot in Terrasen ever. And I mean, I think that's pretty wise, honestly, of Aelin. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's just a good way of ensuring that you're not going to get totally screwed over by someone very powerful. Like Lorcan is extremely powerful. So he decides to take the blood oath because he loves Alide, and this is the only way he can be close to her. Is obviously because Alide's going to be living in Terrasen ultimately if everything goes as planned.
Mm-hmm.
So he chooses the blood oath, which is huge. I think it's sort of meaningful sacrifice on his part, considering what happened with the blood oath with Maeve and everything.
Yeah. No, I think it was like she was very clear with him. And I like the way she did it in the sense that she's like, I don't trust you. I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't know where, like, I don't trust that you won't betray me again.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, but if you want anything to do with Allied, then you have to agree to this.
Mm-hmm.
She kind of knew that him on her side was better, but ultimately she wanted some control. But she is very kind with the blood oath because she's like, I will only ask one thing ever of you, and that is to protect Harrison.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, beyond that, I don't care what you do.
Yeah, it's basically like an insurance policy to make sure he won't turn against them.
Mm-hmm.
And then other than that, he's free.
Mm-hmm. So, like, really, it's not that big of a deal, but
No.
it was sweet
But
that he did it.
I do feel like, though, there would have to be a certain level of trust for someone you give a blood oath to because they have control over everything. They could
Yeah.
ultimately make you do anything, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
think it
he
would
had to
be,
trust her.
mhm, yeah.
They end up making their way to Aurelia, and they actually end up showing up in Anielle, which is really cool. So we do get a few chapters with Kale and Nezrin and that crew before this happens, but essentially, like when Aelin shows up in Anielle is when this storyline really starts to take off. Prior to that, basically the only thing that has happened in Anielle is the battle has started. So when we last left off, it was just about to start, and now it has officially started. There's been one full day of battle, and then it's too dark for them to battle, so everyone's in their war tents planning the next day. And in walks Aelin and her courts, and it's just like so
Oh, I was like,
exciting.
finally. Like, yeah.
So now we have Aelin and her court, Kale, Nezrin, Irene, Sartak, and all of the people that kind of come along with that storyline, all converged in Anielle. And they're planning how do they kind of move forward with the battle that's kind of the siege that's happening on Anielle. And I think it was interesting that Sartak's like, oh, I was like seconds away from releasing the dam. Because we were like, oh, they'll probably release the dam to like save the city. And everyone was like, oh, thank goodness you didn't. And my like, as I'm reading that, I'm like, oh, I would be so bad at planning a war. Because
But
like the
that,
one thing I was like, this is definitely going to
yeah.
happen. It was
Yeah.
like, ooh, don't do
Well, when
this.
I heard about the dam, I was like, it's totally going to be used against them as a huge weapon because it could wipe out the city. Like, it's just really bad positioning of the dam above where everyone lives.
Yeah. Yeah, and ultimately, I guess you ended up incorrect. I thought they were going to use it to their advantage, and that was so not the
I
case.
think we both theorized that though. Like we were both like, this dam is going to play a part somehow.
It was going to play a part for sure,
Yeah.
but it was how it ends up playing a part is not how I pictured it happening.
Yeah.
But it added tension, and I
Oh,
ultimately
yeah.
like what happened, obviously, but it was just very interesting.
Yes. Yes. Alarming. Aelin and Irene. We've been waiting for this forever for them to reunite, and it was kind of cool. Like Irene was noticing the differences in Aelin since they had last spoken, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Irene is very observant.
Mm-hmm. No, it was really sweet to get to see them meet and like the recognition and like
Hmm.
the immediate like um, respect they each had.
Yes.
And I love so much how happy Aelin is for Kale and how like she feels like they found each other and like that was like the perfect thing was that they found each other and was like so happy for
Yeah,
them.
and she sent it on them that like Irene was pregnant, and she was so happy for them. Like
Mm-hmm.
such a nice it's just such a nice part of the story. Like she
It
truly
is.
cares for Kale, and I think the feelings are mutual, but in like a platonic way. And so she's just
Mm-hmm.
really happy for them.
Yeah, no, their relationship has like really gone through a lot, and now it's like they're like really solid friends,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
like no, they are with who they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And another friend from Assassin's Blade era comes into the tent, and it's Falkan, and he's young again because, as we know,
Yeah.
Dorian finally killed the spider that had
Yeah.
taken the years from Falkan.
Yes, so we were wondering like what's going to happen to Falcon? Will this affect him? And it did, and he
Mm-hmm.
got all his years back. So
Yeah.
that's cool. I
And
love that that little subplot was kind of brought into a
tied
complete
up.
circle. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And not only was he young again, but later on, when we see him in the midst of the battle that's about to take place or continue, he's able to now shapeshift into a rook, which he couldn't do before because he could
Mhm.
only be smaller animals.
Mhm.
And we kind of talked about, like, oh, if the spider had stolen a piece of his magic, is that preventing him from being at his full strength? And that did seem to be the case because now he
Mhm.
seems to be more powerful than he was before.
Yeah, exactly. So they kind of just like catch everyone up on what's going on, let them know like, "Hey, by the way, Maeve's a Valg." Like, what?
Mm-hmm.
And then they just continue to plan for the battle.
Before the battle officially starts again the next day, Aelin and Rowan and the cadre kind of pillage a little bit. So we know that Lord Westfall is very rich and has like all this stuff stored away somewhere because he doesn't spend his money upkeeping the the grounds and anything like that. Like, it's very not a great looking place, but the money is there, and they go down into, like, I don't know, dungeon-esque area below the castle. I don't think it's a castle, but below the
The keep.
house, the keep.
Yeah.
And they find all the goods. They find like really, really awesome swords and like weaponry and like this awesome armor. So they get all decked out and head up. And Aylin's like, okay, I just need a minute. I'll meet you guys out there.
Hmm. And she ends up choosing some really cool armor for herself. It's described as like pale gold, and she found her like the crown, and oh, it's really
Mm-hmm.
cool. But like this battle is happening, and Rowan is like, "Where is Aelin? Where is Aelin?" And it's like, "Uh oh,"
Yeah.
because this whole time it's like been mentioned that they haven't even seen a spark or an ember of her power, and you're going, is she okay? Like, did this torture make it so she can't use her power? But I kept
Mm-hmm.
thinking about when she went into that lake and she was
Mm-hmm.
releasing her power, and it was just obviously like a lot that she needed to release. And I thought, well, she must have some access to her power, because like when she was releasing her power, like that was pretty, like she was glowing hot, like she was like just fresh from the forge kind of thing. But
Yeah.
anyway, so it's just really tense. This whole Anielle battle situation is really concerning. It's like
Mm-hmm.
very fraught with tension. And the whole where is Aelin? Where is Aelin? Well, finally Aelin shows up. And rather than using her power, she just shows up looking amazing. And then she just starts slaying, like just taking down everyone. And that is a huge morale booster to everyone around her, because like, there's the queen, and she is she is kicking butt and taking names.
Yeah, I know. She comes out in full force and uses all the training she'd been doing because on the trip back over, they had spent like weeks and weeks training. So she
Mhm.
was ready to show everybody kind of that she's back.
Yeah.
So Morath does, as we kind of alluded to earlier, the Morath army does attempt to break the dam.
Yeah.
And Nezran and Sartak see that this is happening, so they fly over and prevent it from happening during the battle. However, too much damage has been done, and it is going to burst at some point, but they do have some time because it's like, holding on by a thread sort of situation.
Yeah. So the dam's holding on by a thread. Lorcan is like out there battling it all out, but he gets struck down. And before like rewinding a bit, before the whole battle thing happened, Alide was she had told Lorcan like she had had some pretty rough words with him, and
Mm-hmm.
that, oh, I couldn't believe she said this actually, but she actually told Lorcan like, I don't care if the last time I see you is on that battlefield, like basically like I don't care if you die, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I hate myself for feeling for you still. And then that's like her last words to him, and it's like, oh my god. Like,
Yeah.
that was not a wise choice. Even everyone's looking at her with disapproval, and then she's like, oh, like, was that, you know,
Too
everyone's
far.
getting a little tired of her being so hard on Lorcan. But yeah, so not good because he does get struck down.
Yeah. But he like is basically taking on the whole section of Mora's army by himself, and he is killing it, as in
Mhm.
killing them. But like, he's a force, but at the same time, numbers will eventually just overtake you, regardless of how good you are in a battle. If
Yeah,
they outnumber you, you're going to eventually go down,
yeah.
and that is what happens. Is he gets struck in the back and then cut across like the stomach, so it's like insides are
Not inside
exposed.
anymore.
Not
Yeah.
inside anymore. And although they do end up winning the battle, like Anielle's side ends up winning the battle, they do have the dam that is still going to burst at some point. So they're kind of like feeling, I think, a little sense of relief. And then in comes Nezrin and Sartak, and they're like, the dam's about to burst. And so they just start scrambling because all of the Coggins kind of cavalry and foot soldiers
Yeah,
are
the
on the
big,
plane that is
yeah.
going to be washed away.
Yes. So this is, yeah. Hussar is like, what? Like, oh
Well, yeah, it's all her
no.
people.
Yeah.
So they kind of come up with a terrible plan, but the only plan that they can come up with of like trying to get people, as many people to safety as possible. And Alide's there and she's like, where's Lorcan? And everyone's like, who cares? Who knows? I don't know. She's like, where is he? And she just starts like freaking out. And
Mm-hmm.
Gabrielle's like, the last time I saw him, this is where he was. And they're like, oh, Fenris, go jump and get him. Use your powers, jump and get him. And he's like, I can't. Like, I physically can't. And it like
Mm-hmm.
really hurts him that he can't, but
Yeah.
he is unable to use his powers since his brother passed away. And Eli's gone. And I'm
Yeah.
like, how did no one know that she left? How did no one know that she ran away? And I'm like, why
Oh
is no
yeah.
one helping this poor girl who's like in such distress? Like you can hear the despair in like you can't hear it because you're reading, but like in my head I could hear the despair
You could
in
feel
her
it.
voice. You
Yeah.
could feel it in the words. And she takes Kale's little hell horse and
Farasha.
Farasha. And Kale always used to call her Hella's horse.
Yeah.
And they noticed her on the battlefield on this horse going after, like trying to find Lorcan. And Kale's like, she took my horse. And then
Yeah.
one of the cadre, probably Gabriel, because he's like the most like level-headed, is like, oh, like they kind of have these gods on their shoulders, like Hellas, and then I can't remember the name of the god.
Anieth.
And
I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but it's Anieth, I think.
that
And
sounds right.
Anith. I
And
don't know how to pronounce it.
but Gabriel's like, maybe the gods will help them find each other because I think the
Mm-hmm.
gods are kind of connected in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And Kale's are like, oh, that's so interesting that I call my horse Hella's horse and he's Lorcan's connected to Hellas. Like maybe the reason I brought her here was for this moment kind of thing.
In a way, Elide is connected to Hellas too, because the goddess that whispers in her ear, I believe resides in hell or somehow connected to
Oh.
Hellas, Anieth.
Yeah.
Um, so that is pretty cool because it's like they're destined, they're
Mm-hmm.
fated to be together. They're both kind of connected to these gods or goddesses that are also connected in some way. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like they're fated to be together in a different sense than like fated
Yeah.
mates,
Yeah,
which is
and
really cool.
Farasha is a fierce, terribly cranky horse.
Yeah. But
And
like respects
she
Allied.
she respects Allied, which I think is huge, speaks huge volumes about something.
Mhm, something. I feel like there's
Yeah.
more to Allied. She's like, I don't have any magic. Like there's like magic in my blood, but like I don't have it. Or there's something in her blood, the power in her blood. I can't remember exactly how it's put. But I'm like, there's something more to this girl
Well,
than
yeah,
what I'm
because
learning.
her line, her lineage is very full of magic, but she doesn't have any like apparent magic. But she does
Mhm.
have that goddess who whispers to her. I'm like, that's kind of your thing, isn't it? Like, that's pretty huge. You have a goddess
Yeah.
who talks to you and like tells you stuff.
I think she has the power of persuasion, and she doesn't see it as an actual power, but I think it is more than just she's because she can lie and she can convince people to do things. And I
Yeah.
think it's not just that she's good at that. Like, I feel like it is an actual magic.
An actual, yeah, magic. Yeah, that makes sense. So anyway, so she's like charging across this field, and she ends up um she ends up finding Lorcan, and he's like under a pile of bodies, and she's just
Hmm.
screaming his name, and he's kind of like this, I was imagining like this hand shooting up
Yeah.
through the bodies, like digging through, and it was kind of reminding me of, do you remember that episode in Game of Thrones where Jon Snow is getting like buried in the bodies and it's like very claustrophobic and he's like trying to like fight his way out? Do you remember that?
No, I don't, but
Oh, it's
there's
a
a lot of
it's
Game of
it's during
Thrones.
this battle and there's just like so much death piling up around him. He's actually getting buried in bodies.
Oh.
Anyway, so it was just reminding me a bit of that, but
Hmm.
not quite, because Lorcan was grievously injured and basically waiting to die, laying there
Hmm.
waiting to die. But he hears Alide screaming his name, and so he kind of like fights his way out, and she rescues him. And it's
Yeah.
really, really intense, obviously, because he's like very injured, very grievously injured. But they end up like getting on Farasha, and now there's this mad dash to get back because this dam is going to break, and then they're going to just be swept away and killed or whatever.
Hmm.
So, oh my gosh, this is so intense because you're just reading and you're like, and you can just picture Farasha just booking it across the plains, and they're just,
Hmm.
she's going at breakneck speed and like an impossible speed. And Alide has been like, you must go faster, and Farasha's digging in deep. And I think Lorcan even notices like, how has this horse's heart not given out, because it's going just charging. So it's pretty cool.
Hmm.
But if that dam breaks, they'll have seconds and then they're gone. So despite how
Hmm.
fast Farasha is going, it won't be enough.
Yeah.
But so one more detail. He's like, I'm gonna jump off because then there'll be like less weight, and then Farasha,
Hmm.
like without my weight, you could make it. And Alide's like, no.
Yeah,
Doesn't
she
let
like
him.
literally digs her fingers into him so he can't like physically can't jump off without pulling her with him.
Yeah, she's like, if you jump off, I'm coming with you. We're gonna die
Hmm.
together. And then he's like, well, that can't happen. So he has to hang
Yeah.
on. So just when you think like there's no way, and I thought, oh, here we go. Here we go. But at the same time, I was like, wait, there's a part that I has been spoiled for me that hasn't happened yet. So I know these two aren't gonna die at this moment. Can't
No, they
can't
can't
be.
possibly die.
No. So Aelin is dropped onto the battlement, like, so this wave is coming now. And it's like, oh, everyone's gonna die. But Aelin is like, goes down onto the plains right in front of the
Hmm.
wave. And then she just holds up her hand like she's telling the wave to stop. And then this huge blast of like fire magic comes out of her. So it's like this massive wall of magic, but it's not just that. It's not just like to block the wave. There's also, it's described that the earth beneath her feet just splinters, and then there's like all
Hmm.
these cracks, and you can see like the glow of like the hot earth core kind of idea coming up. But I guess in Anielle, side note, they have hot springs and stuff there.
Hmm.
So,
So I think there's like hot
and
water underneath, anyways.
yeah, so she basically like opens up the earth, and I guess she could like sense all of that because of her fire magic. She could sense that below the, I keep saying earth, I don't know if we call it earth there, but to get the point across, right?
Yeah.
So although you have all this concern that her magic is blocked because it's been alluded to or hinted that like she might not be able to use her magic, that's actually not been the case at all. I guess while
Hmm.
she was being tortured and confined, she had just been diving deeper and deeper and deeper into her magic. So she's been going down for 3 months into the depths of her magic, and she never hit the bottom. It sounds like it sounds like
Hmm.
she just kept going and going and going. And I think that was also the reason why she seemed so distant from everybody. I thought it was due to the psychological aspects of everything she went through, but actually she has just been delving down and down and down into her magic. And when I heard this, I was like, so Aelin isn't as damaged psychologically as maybe we thought. She's just been concentrating.
Yeah. She's been working really hard.
So she's been diving into her magic because her plan was is to use all of this as the killing blow for Maeve. But she has to use it for this because otherwise a massive part of their army is going to be wiped out. So many innocent lives are going to be taken. So she decides to use what she had been reserving for Maeve for this moment. So the wave is like hitting her magic, but there's also these cracks. So the water is also like sinking down below the ground. And Alide and Lorcan like had stopped on Farasha and are just like looking at what's happening. And I was like, I was kind of frustrated by that. I was like, dude,
keep
go. Yeah. But
Yeah.
they were fine because, yeah,
poor
Aelin
Rowan's
saved
up,
everyone.
and Rowan's like up in the keep, and he's like also using his magic to hold off the steam because like fire hits water, it's going to be steam, and steam is just as dangerous.
Oh,
So
yeah.
he's using his air magic to hold back the steam, so everyone, all the soldiers who are still on the battlement, are able to make it inside the gate of the keep.
Yeah, without being steam cooked.
I think they save everyone.
Yeah, they saved everybody. And like, and Rowan, this was like, he's extremely powerful, but he like collapsed after because this was a massive amount of magic, which goes to show like how much power Aelin was using.
Yeah, they both like slept for 3 days after or something.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things about like the fact that she used that much magic is, like you said, she'd been going into her magic well for 3 months. And back when she was in the sarcophagus and her mom spoke to her, she said something along the lines like, you like what you're going through is like almost like it's important what you're going through. And I wonder if this is what she meant, because if she hadn't been put in that situation, she would never have been able to gain that much power. So exactly. It's like almost like it was fated that she go through what she went through so that she could like have this power to save Anielle, but also maybe so she can see that she's capable of power like this.
Yeah. It should be interesting to see because now she knows she's capable of that type of power, but it was also explained that she would never be able to do that again because obviously she can't be confined like that again. So, yeah.
Yeah, because it was like the iron sarcophagus specifically that made it so she could do it. Yeah. So, yeah, it's interesting to know, though, that is something that is in her.
Well, it's funny because Maeve did that as a way to suppress her power, but in the end, it was like it actually made her stronger. Yeah.
And there's a really cool part after she uses this power where it talks about how she, when like the fire or glow from the fire leaves her body, she's back into Aelin. Like it transformed her back into her true self.
Yeah.
She definitely is being affected by the situation she was in. And we've seen her break down. We've seen her tell Fenris and Rowan, I'm not okay. So I wonder if this kind of was what she needed to do also to maybe be a bit more okay. And we can kind of really expect to see the true Aelin that we have come to know.
I think so. Yeah, it felt like a chapter was chapter in Aelin's life was kind of closing. This unfamiliar sort of distant person who we don't know, felt like that part was over. And maybe we get to see her normal sort of plotting somewhat humorous self again. We'll see. The swagger, will she get it back? I don't know, because she had been faking the swagger all this time.
Yeah.
Irene has been very busy this whole time, removing Valg from soldiers' bodies, kind of thing, or their whatever host that they had infested themselves into. So
Mm-hmm.
Aelin asks for a demonstration. So they go, and it takes a lot out of Irene, though. Like, it's quite a intense process. And I'm wondering if is she the only healer who can do this? Who can
I was
remove the...
wondering that also. I thought she trained, I thought it said that she trained others, but
I'm not
now it sounds
sure.
like she didn't.
It was sort of like it seemed like she was the only one who could, but maybe we'll get more clarity on that as we move forward in the story,
Mm-hmm.
because it seems like an awful lot for just one person to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, they said she can only do like 15
A day.
a day if
Yeah.
they're easy ones.
Yeah, and the one that she did the demonstration for Aelin was she said it was that Val didn't want to go, so it was definitely more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how that affects her and her condition, like the fact that she's pregnant. I do
Yeah, they
feel a
did
bit more
mention.
concerned for her in her vulnerable condition she's now in.
Mm-hmm.
But a good question was posed. And why haven't we thought of this?
It's so obvious.
Like, could this be done to Erowyn or Maeve? Could they remove the Valg from the body that Maeve has been inhabiting?
Mm-hmm.
Will Another question I have is, if she removes the Valg from the body, is the body, can they come back to themselves? Is that always the case?
Mm. I think one of the questions I was kind of posed because they themselves are asking this question, like Aelin and Rowan, I think, are asking this question, like, is this possible? And you're like, of course. And but they say, like, are Erwin and Maeve, like, did they take human bodies? Or are the bodies that they're using something different? We know Erwin took what's his
Duke
name's?
Parrington.
Yeah, so we know, yeah, at one point he did. So I am more convinced that Erwin can be
Yeah, but Maeve,
destroyed in that
though.
way. But
Yeah.
Maeve, I'm not sure about because we don't know how she created that Fey body.
Yeah, did she infect a Fey host, or is it some other kind of magic?
So I
And if
don't
she
know.
has infected a Fey host, she's been in that same body for a very long time, like hundreds of years.
hmm Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see. I
Because can
wonder
you
if.
imagine, like, can you just imagine being infected like that for that period of time? If that was like if it was a Fey body that she took and they separated her from the Fey body, like, would that Fey be okay? Like, because it's been like hundreds and hundreds of years of being in the back seat essentially and not having any control over what you're doing. Like, that Fey, yeah, I don't know. That would be really disturbing.
It'd be interesting to see because in real terms, that Fey would no longer exist. So is the Fey, like, did the Fey part of the body die as it
Yeah,
aged, like when it would have had it
right.
not been infected? Or did
Yeah,
it continue to stay alive because it was infected?
exactly.
Or is it not a Fey body at all and she's done some sort of witchcraft?
Yeah, I'm sure. Hopefully, we find out. I'm very interested to
Hopefully.
know.
I think we will. I wonder
Hmm.
if it will work for Erwin, but when it comes to Maeve, it's something different going on because she's like a Val queen. And I wonder if that's
Yeah,
going to make a difference.
right. Yeah, yeah,
But I am very surprised that neither of us thought of this because it just seemed, as soon as they said it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so obvious.
yeah.
But that's,
I for some reason thought perhaps, though, that because they're so powerful, it wasn't an option.
yeah,
But maybe it is, though.
simply,
Sounds like it is.
it sounds like it could be for sure. And it didn't even cross my mind that
Yeah.
it could be done. But we are told about the books back, the ones that were in the Torre Chesme. And they had brought the books and told Aelin during their little tower meeting, they told Aelin that they had brought the books for her to read because they have like word marks.
Hmm.
And one of the things I read in the books is that there's a spell for portals, and it's something very similar to Fenris's power where you can jump from one place to another through a portal. And I was like, instantly I was like, oh, they're going to portal to Terrasen and they'll be there instantly and be able to help. But no, that didn't happen. I am sad to report that did not happen.
But I'm kind of wondering though, because they did say like, okay, we're gonna go to Terrasen now, and then it's like
Mhm.
that's the end of part 1, and I'm like, finally. But maybe, maybe they will just be almost to Terrasen for part 2. Like it'll be like, whoop, okay, here, like,
Maybe it'll still happen, is what you're saying?
I don't know. It's like I just want Aelin to go home.
Yes. Yeah, I hope it doesn't take too long for her to get to Terrasen. Like, I hope it's not like the entire next section is them making their way to Terrasen. I feel like that would be a little too long. But I mean, it's not like I haven't enjoyed everything that we've kind of experienced so far,
Mm-hmm.
even though it is a lot of detail and there's a lot of things that like really could be cut out. And I think the main storyline would stand, but I still really enjoy all those details.
Yeah. So it ends with them going north via the Farian Gap because they're heading home. I just wanted to mention something. So you know the new covers of that have come out of Throne of Glass, because
Yes.
I think like I can see in the background there you have like one of the original covers. The new covers though, Kingdom of Ash. Have you seen the new cover for Kingdom of Ash?
I have, but I can't picture it. Like
Okay.
I,
Well, it's just like a bunch of what I assume is King's Flame flowers.
mm,
And
yes.
then, and I'm like, dude, isn't that a spoiler? Because like,
I mean,
but
I think maybe we just like it's very obvious that at some point that's going to come.
yeah,
Maybe everyone already kind of guessed that that was going to be something, so they're like,
yeah.
let's put on the cover. It looks pretty.
I know. I was just kind of like, well, but
Maybe
anyway,
they're faking us out, and it's not going to happen.
yeah, maybe.
I don't think that's true. I don't believe that.
So, what did you like or dislike about this section of the book?
I kind of found like last time we talked about how the kind of Adie and Lysandra storyline was a little on the slower side. For
Mm-hmm.
this section, I found it was like the witches storyline that was
Mm-hmm.
a little on the slower side.
Mm-hmm.
However, the last chapter, like the matron chapter where she's battling and then like she gets the crown, that completely made up for the slower pace of the witches storyline. Like that was such a massive moment. I just
Mm-hmm.
love that part so much.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That was I just agree with everything you just said. It was definitely a bit slower, but I actually found it really interesting though, because there's some weird things happening, like with Dorian's practice into shape shifting. He has successfully shifted, now into an animal, like a completely different form. Whereas at the beginning, he was kind of like even struggling to change the color of his eyes. So he's
Mhm.
had like a breakthrough with his magic in that way. Um, the fact that Manon proposed like marriage to Dorian was pretty
Mhm.
huge. And yeah. And I just love that she's the queen of the witches now. So cool.
It is really, really cool. And that crown, oh, I want to see that crown. And I love that Lorcan and Alide made up. And although we did say, like, oh, it shouldn't take someone almost dying for you to forgive them, I will forgive that's kind of how Alide and Lorcan came together.
Lorcan also didn't seem to have a problem with that. Like
No.
he was okay with that. Lysandra was not okay with that. But
Yeah.
Lorcan was.
Yeah. It worked for them.
Yeah, it
I
works
think
for them.
everything worked out for them. But I absolutely, the worst part of this section of the book was the way Adian treated Lysandra.
Yeah.
We've talked about it already, but like honestly,
Mm-hmm.
still so upset with him about that. Like
I
that was
know.
so unacceptable. But I'm totally in love with how she handled it.
I can see why like, we can all see why it happened. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it was just like the situation they were in was so bad. But the fact that he took it out on Lysandra, like, he was just very much in his emotions and not thinking through it from her perspective. He was being very selfish, I feel, about it,
Mm-hmm.
and the way he was feeling about it, because they were all in that position, not just him. And I thought it was so heartbreaking that Lysandra was like, well, I wanted to have kids with you anyway. So it was like fine for
Mm-hmm.
me. And then he was like, yeah, I agree. That was definitely the worst part.
Mm-hmm.
So for myself, I really love the detail in there because we learned this before, but I heard about it again. Like Farasha, the horse, her
Mm-hmm.
name means butterfly. And she's such a savage. Like
Yeah.
she's just savage, like literally stomping on her enemies to kill them. And
Yes.
she's just so intense and just so ferocious. And her name means butterfly. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that detail. That was like my favorite detail of this entire section.
And I also like how when Alide was like telling her to run faster, she was like fly, and it's kind of because
Yeah.
she's a butterfly,
Butterfly. I know.
and
Oh,
she told her to fly, and that's when she like really like went into her full speed.
yeah.
I like for
I,
a second
I,
was like, is she literally flying? And I was like, oh
right?
no, no,
Like,
no.
you know. Yeah. But like I mean she was going really fast for Lorcan in his state to be like, how has this horse's heart not given out? Like this is
Yeah,
incredible. So Farash is special.
she's very special.
Yeah. Oh, and my favorite quote of the book was
Mhm.
I think towards the end of the section, when Aelin and Rowan are kind of like talking, and she's like, he's like, well, it's better than being called a cold-hearted bastard, or I heard you killed someone with a table leg. And Aelin's like, you did kill someone with a table
Yeah.
leg. I love that. I thought that was so funny.
That was a really funny part where they were going back and forth.
Yeah.
I was just also thinking about, I think it's a little bit earlier on, they're talking about like how rumors are starting to spread about Aelin, and she's like, oh, I'm gonna start a rumor about you. And
Oh,
she
right.
like loudly whispers something about him plucking the eyes out of the soldiers and
And
eating them
eating them. That's right.
as they're walking past somebody, so that rumor would start going around.
Yeah.
And he's like, thanks for that.
I
Now, I
know.
don't know if that was at the same time or a different
I
time,
feel like
but
it was. I feel like it
it
was
was.
kind of like when they were bantering.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
yeah,
so
I love
funny.
seeing this lighthearted side of Aelin come back.
Hmm. And I think it could rub some people the wrong way reading some of the way she talks about the cadre, but I think that they are all okay with it. But some of the things she says about them, like, oh, they're not house trained and blah, like just the way she talks about them it's funny, but I could see some people being offended by it, but it's all in good
I,
fun. And
yeah, I
I
think
think
it's all
they're
in
on
good
board
fun
with
for
it.
sure. Yeah. Oh, another thing I really enjoyed, another sort of, I want to say it's a quote, but it's not really kind of a quote, was how I think, was it Irene? Anyways, I can't recall who it was that noticed it, but they noticed when they saw the group of Fae for the first time how they could really tell they all still had one foot in the forest. I
Mm-hmm.
loved that. I thought, and that was another one of my favorite parts to read.
Yeah. And like Borte's just like obsession with the Fae.
Yeah,
Just like
so
anytime
cute.
Borte is on print, it's like a
Yeah.
hilarious scene.
I would love a novella about Borte and her
Oh
relationship with her
yes.
fiance too, because it's
Yes.
obviously very like spicy and up and down, and I
Yeah.
would love to read their love story. I would love
Hmm.
that.
No, their relationship is like they clearly care very deeply about each other, but they pretend to hate each other. It's so
Yeah,
funny.
yeah, it is.
All right, now that we have officially finished the first half of Kingdom of Ash, do you have any thoughts or predictions moving forward of what you think might progress in like the next section, like the next quarter chunk?
Actually, no. Like so many things happened to me that were unexpected. Like, for example, had no idea Aelin was burrowing deep into her power for a killing
Mm-hmm.
blow. Now she's used that. Um, just so many things that happened that I did not expect. I actually have no idea what's going to happen now. I think my earlier predictions about something bad happening to like Azturin, I don't want that to happen, but I still think
Mm-hmm.
that could be a thing. Um, Given everything that's been happening, though, now I just feel like my mind is just one big blank, nothing with a
Mm-hmm.
big question mark moving forward. Like, what do you
Yeah.
think?
I agree with everything you're saying. I did have a few things that kind of popped up. For the most part, the way that the story has gone so far, it's made me less sure about what's
Yeah,
going to happen.
exactly. Yeah.
Because, like, so many things happen that I wasn't expecting, as you mentioned.
Hmm.
As you were talking, though, it did make me think that I wonder if, or I think that a large portion of the witches are going to go over onto Manon's side. I don't think all of them will necessarily, but I do
Hmm.
think some of them will choose to kind of go over onto her side and fight for
Yeah.
her.
Yeah. I think it's
And
really interesting how they were kind of like, you sound like Rhiannon, and like kind of a. So I think there would definitely be those hardcore witches that want to stick to their brutal ways,
mhm,
and their brutal sort of appearance or image that they've always had. I think there's going to be a lot of witches too, though, that it made a big, I think, impact when Astrid lifted up her shirt and showed
mhm,
everybody that. So I think you're right about that. And I think there's going to be a good deal of witches who stay on Morath's side as well.
mhm. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see at the end of the war what happens with the witches, because I think they'll
Hmm.
be divided. But
Yeah.
maybe by then they'll all kind of come together and be forgiven. We'll see. I do wonder, because Dorian is going to Morath, and they're Aelin and Kale are walking through the Ferrying Gap. I wonder if they'll somehow like meet up. That it's not really the exact same area, but it is relatively close.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure, because I feel like Dorian still has a lot to do. So, and it's sometimes unclear exactly how the stories line up time wise.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't be surprised if they met up with Dorian. I would like if they met up with Dorian, but I'm not sure if the timelines are going to kind of line up for that to happen.
There's also the idea that they may not need the word keys like they thought.
Mm-hmm.
So that is also something I wasn't expecting. So yeah, I'm not sure. There might be a way around this sort of prophecy thing, for Aelin to live, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah, I don't know. I'm just so mind blown. Like, oh, I don't know. You got to see what happens here.
I think one thing I'm questioning is if they defeat Erwin without needing to use the keys, it's kind of going to screw over the gods' plan of getting back to their home.
You know
Because
what
if they
though?
refuse to forge the lock, or they like, yeah,
Screw
then
the gods, though,
screw the gods. I feel
man.
like that's like
Like,
an underlying thread that's kind of happening as people are like, screw
yeah,
them. They're
yeah,
starting to turn on the gods a little bit.
yeah. Why are we their little pawns in this game? Like, I
And they're
don't
not
know
even real gods, they're just aliens that have come down and taken over and like
exactly.
portrayed themselves as gods.
Which makes sense because, I mean,
Yeah.
you could see that happening,
Oh yeah,
right?
that
Like,
happens. Like there's so many stories where that's like, I
yeah,
mean, that's the whole Eternals thing in Marvel.
yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
but I do think there's more coming with the gods. I don't think we've kind of gotten to the final information in regards to
No,
what's going on with the gods.
no, definitely not. I agree with that 100%.
I think that wraps up this next chunk. And despite us saying we didn't want it to be 2 hours long, we have not succeeded.
Oh my goodness.
Too much to say. It's just so
Too much
good.
to say. If we keep cutting out more, it'll be like, I don't know. Good luck to us. We'll
Yeah,
try again next time.
we'll keep trying.
We'll keep trying. Thanks for joining us today. Hope to see you next time.
Bye for now.